We are now live. I can't believe it. All right, meeting is now streaming live on Facebook. How awesome is that? My apologies.
What did you do?
I know, right? I have no idea what I did, but whatever I did, it worked. So greetings to everybody. Jivamaya Yoga Wisdom Talks. So much for going on vacation, right? I'll learn next time not to go on vacation so I don't have to reset everything up. Anyway, today we welcome Anne Pitman, and this is just such an honor. And for the next half hour, you will know what I already know, which is that Anne is just this amazing woman who is in a profession that is so profound to me. Anne has had her master's in kinesiology. She's the director of the School of Embodied Yoga Therapy. I will give you the website when I post this for YouTube. She has over 35 years of teaching experience. She facilitates the Year to Live, which is by Stephen Levine, and has intensively studied at the Orphan Wisdom School with Stephen Jenkinson. And I will also send you that website, that information, because it's really quite beautiful. She is a practicing certified yoga therapist at the Ottawa Integrative, how do you say that? Integrative. Cancer Center, where she really accompanies people who are living with cancer, as well as helping people in their ending days to die well, which is really, how often do we think about that? Die well, what does that mean? So that's really so incredible. I have Anne's email address, which I will share with you, and also a course that's coming up in December, which is just beautiful, through the Minded Institute. So without further ado, Anne, thank you so much for spending this time with us. I can't tell you how honored we are to discuss this subject of grief, which I think for all of us right now is whatever it is that we might be grieving, a loss of a job, a loss of a loved one, the country as a whole, the world as a whole. There's a lot of grief out there right now. I'd love to start with a little bit about you and your journey, and how did grief find you? How did you come to?
That's actually very well said, I think.
Yeah,
That's
yeah,
well said.
yeah. So how did all this come about?
Well, I would love to tell you that it was an academic interest or some kind of brilliant career planning of some kind, but none of that is true. And as it is quite often with people who work in this field, it was a personal experience of grief. My very dearest friend took her life, and well, there's really no language for that, really, and probably not great language with regard to how that is embodied. But certainly I was shattered, and in so much physical pain, mental pain, emotional pain, and really not very functional at all, and was looking for help. And I was a yoga teacher at the time, but I found a suicide support group. And I wish I could tell you that went well. It did not go well for me, because grief lands differently for people, for sure. But the facilitator, bless her heart, liked to start the evening with a joke. And there was no part of me that could laugh or understand the joke, understand much at all. And I was left quite, feeling maybe I was doing grief wrong, or, just abandoned, really. And almost like there was, this positive layering on top of what was, so vitally felt at the time. So I wanted to know more, and needed to know more, and really needed an education in grief, in what I would call a grief illiterate society, I would say, with as much gentleness as I can make that sound. And I did find Stephen Jenkinson, luckily, and attended his school. And I've been an ongoing scholar there for, well, I think about 11 years now. So in the midst of all of that, working with cancer and bringing that work best I can to people who are facing cancer and their families, and finding some way of tending to grief in a good way, in a way that's respectful to grief itself, I hope. Mm-hmm.
And if someone were to ask you, what is grief? How would you reply to that?
Well, I'd ask them how much time they have, but you know, it is commonly known as an emotion. But you know, I would, you know, my learning has led me in the direction of seeing it a little bit wider and deeper than emotion. I mean, there are emotions associated with it, of course. You know, I've come to understand it as a skillfulness and as a human-making possibility. Maybe it's an embodied experience of endings. You know, it's so stitched together with love and life, and it's hard to say. I don't think they're separable. I've never been with someone who was in the throes of grieving where love was not also very much present. And, you know, even years afterward, you know, when someone comes back and it's been a long time since what they were working with, and, you know, it's a very odd possibility, but they often wish they could go back. And it's not that they want to be in pain, but there's something that breaks you open in that time of grief that it kind of lifts the veil a little bit, maybe of our illusions, or has you seeing more clearly, seeing beauty more clearly, noticing the impermanence of it all. And so there's something that's very, I guess I want to say maturing. I hope that's well said. There's something deepening that can happen. And I don't want it to make it sound like it's a silver lining, because it really, silver linings aren't, I have found, really appropriate at the time of grieving. They don't really meet someone where they are. You can't really make a case for how great grief is when someone is deep in. But I do think of it as a skill, and I have learned that from Stephen, and that, you know, we can learn to tend to it and see it and allow it to be part of our human-making lived experience. Does that land? Does that?
Oh, that's beautiful. And my experience of my partner of 8 years, who died a year after our son was born, I can understand what you're saying. I think the physical pain was what caught me most by surprise. I really had no idea that there would be that. But I agree with what you're saying. There's a rawness, there's a different dimension, in a sense, to life, not necessarily your life, but life in general. So, and I think you're right. I think that there is a skill involved in learning how to navigate from that place. Yeah. Wow.
Well, there's a very beautiful poem by Naomi Shibab Nye. Maybe I'll just give you a tiny bit of it.
Yeah, please.
Because it just speaks to, you know, the possibility of turning toward it, but also, you know, how stitched it is with kindness and joy as well. And so she says in the body of the poem, before you know kindness as the deepest thing inside, you must also know sorrow as the other deepest thing. You must wake up with sorrow. You must speak to it until your voice catches the thread of all sorrows and you see the size of the cloth. it's just tingly. The
Beautiful.
capacity that you have when that veil of everything is fine and nothing will ever happen to you, and good people don't have terrible things happen to them, or even what is a terrible thing, who knows? But you see the size of the cloth, you see the human condition, and the beauty of it all, and the kindness that erupts at this time. In this time of pandemic, could it be that we're connected through grief? I think of people singing on balconies, and food being made for frontline workers, and what are these? Masks. I've just lost the word, because you know what? I think of them as prayer flags for your face. And, just all the beauty that is coming at this time. And it's not something to fix, grief. It's not a problem to solve. But as you say, the embodied experience of it can be very difficult. And one can feel flooded and overwhelmed and in physical pain. And these are things we can come to.
Right.
Without making grief wrong, without giving the idea that we're supposed to get over it, and what's up with this continued situation. But there are ways that we can come to it that I think are deeply respectful of someone's experience, and but that can be of service to this widening that is happening in front of you. Mm-hmm.
You had mentioned, as we were talking earlier, I think the last time we were speaking, the importance of the word avidya here. I was wondering if you might want to address that. For the listeners, avidya is commonly known as a sort of misconception or a misunderstanding, and I think it's very apropos here, and I was wondering if you'd like to address that.
Yeah, that is interesting. And there's so many understandings, aren't there? And it might even come into a lack of awareness, or not seeing things as they truly are. And, there's a human touch is needed in this, isn't it? That, we're not trying to knock someone over the head with awareness when they're in a big place, we're like, oh, this is how humans are, and this is the way the world is, but it is an embodiment yourself as a therapist of how things must be, how life is. And that if we're talking about grief with regard to dying, that dying serves life in every way you can think of, including the food that you eat, even if you're a vegetarian. That all of this beautiful earth that you grow your vegetables in is in fact the dying of all that can feed. And so it's a slow thing, and it's really, I do think it's so much about accompanying someone. And we know something about that as yoga therapists and yoga teachers, that being with truly listening, not rushing things, being with how they are right now. So not, increasing your awareness to how it is for them in this moment, so that you're not in the klesha of avidya yourself.
Right.
And how can we, accompany them in this, so that in a culture that asks them to get over it, or will bring some platitude to it, unfortunately, like, oh, she's in a better place, or what have you, and all with good intention, of course. But, how can we, sometimes it's a matter of lending someone your nervous system, for a time when grief is having their way with someone. And I mean that in a very respectful way to grief, and a very respectful way to the person too. It's not, it's not pleasant, I'm sure, and it doesn't have to be approved of, but but here it is, and this is the way it really is. And how can we help each other in that time of that deeper grief? It's, it does change as things go, and sometimes I feel like I'm working with people who are, really in the midst of it. Like it's just blinding. And often I'm not. Often I'm working with people who are, just wanting to practice differently, practice with impermanence, practice with compassion. And isn't compassion what actually is sown in grief? It must be where compassion arises in times like that, and hopefully self-compassion too, that we can, help each other with. Yeah, it's one of the main things. But sometimes as a therapist, I'm often guided by asteya, which is more of, it's sometimes said to be kind of the non-stealing yama, the way that we can, as a therapist, not steal their time with grief. That in the way of just trying to get them out.
Yeah.
But how can you, and it really requires a lot in you too, to be with suffering, to, just be able to hang out with that and not make it wrong. It's really something.
So I guess for the yoga teachers and yoga therapists that might be listening, and for others as well, two things come to mind, and that is there a point in time where one feels that one does need to say, okay, because we feel perhaps our experience is telling us, or whatever it might be, that this has now gone on for quite a long time, and from the point of view of physically and mentally, this is going to start really affecting this person, and we need to get past this block here, whatever that might be. And when you see that happening, how do you work with that? Because of course we're concerned about going down into that sort of whole tamasic state, which is a very dangerous place to hang out in. So how do you work with that as a yoga therapist when you come across that? And maybe you don't very often.
Well, I mean, it's pretty much like anything that you come across as a yoga therapist, is, I guess I keep two things in mind. Is it functional? And what I mean by functional is, has it had its way? It's good, deepening, widening way. Not that I'm the one who's figuring this out, but together we're co-assessing that, let's say. Or has it become a groove that feels like you just need a little bit of help through it? But quite honestly, I find it hardly ever gets to that place, because the culture is so insistent. I think I'm more often ringing the bell of, hold on.
Okay.
Let's just be with this a little bit, shall we? And notice what's happening in you as we speak, because like many other experiences, it often lands in the body in a particular way. And so some people will find that it feels like they're being strangled, or some people feel like the weight on their chest is so heavy, or stomach is so upset. And so we work with this in a very compassionate inquiry, and as someone is talking about their experience, often this changes. And there are some practices I found to be very helpful with regard to working with the tension that accumulates from armoring, against an experience, or armoring against the culture that tells you to stop feeling it, or whatever it might be. That we we find a way of working, and it's often lateral movements, often very slow. It's very interoceptive. And I have found it to be, very, very useful with regard to relieving the physical pain. It's a spiral, I think, and we come back to several things, and often other griefs or other experiences of grief will show up in these times. So all to be held in a good way as we work through it.
Would you be able to share some of those practices, or maybe be able to give those listening maybe just a few quote unquote tools, as we call them, that they can start thinking about using and trying to implement, and just sort of try them on for size?
Sure. As long as we, are in agreement that we're not trying to fix this problem,
Right.
or make it different for someone, and that we know how to do it and they don't, and all of that, which, hopefully that's not even in the room. So, one of the biggest, let's call it a tool, because I can't think of anything else, but one of the biggest tools is acknowledgement. Someone will come in with a cancer diagnosis and they don't know why they're feeling so crazy, or they're feeling so numb, they can't connect to anyone. And when I say the word grief, when I say, they're telling the story, and we're noticing how it is in their body. And I say, so much grief. And it's almost like there's this silence often, and this huge relief in the person to name it that way, to understand it differently. They don't realize that, there are so many endings that don't seem to be visible to us, it seems, for someone who has a cancer diagnosis, the ending of their identity or their job, or, all kinds of things that they're coming to. And, we don't have a cultural practice of endings, which is one of the practices, actually, which is begin to notice endings.
Yeah.
And really notice them. Even saying goodbye to someone, really say goodbye to them for a change. We know things are impermanent, but we proceed as though that's not true. So, their capacity to notice their bodies in this time of great grief, and to notice where it's landing in them, that we might, offer some compassion to those places, of course. And to, when we have a shock of some kind, which sometimes grief starts that way, as I explained, was a kind of a shattering. And we have that sympathetic or dorsal vagal possibility in our body, right? So we often go there, and it tends to accumulate in the center of the body. So any kind of lateral movement, I'm sitting, so I'm doing the sitting, but this seems like such a simple thing to say, but it's just huge to move slowly, to notice the movement. And in fact, what you're doing when you move in these ways that you would never move if you were threatened, or if you had this enormous shock, you have this bottom up information happening. So you're really informing your nervous system that in this moment, just this moment and just this breath, that here you are, here with another human being, and you can begin to take that in. And it's really surprising how the body is so willing to work in this way, and to bring more. I think of it as incredibly nourishing, slow movement that brings circulation, and it's like feeding the body with movement and breath. Of course, everyone's different, so I'm not suggesting that everyone carries grief in the same way or has had the same experience, but it is feeling into where are they at this time, and what would be, the tiniest little drop of practice that isn't too much, that they're available for. Yeah, so there's all kinds of practices in that realm. But there are things in our daily life too that finding someone who knows something about grief in your world. You might think that they're not there, but they are.
Yeah.
And as soon as you've been through an experience like this, you can see them. Yeah. Yeah. But often they're, the older folks who have, they've seen troubled times before. This is a troubled time too, and we could be asking more of them and asking for some good guidance, from people who have been through experiences like this. Yeah, so all kinds of possibilities. And here's another one, beauty. This is also stitched up with grief, as I mentioned before, that all of this beauty making erupts in the place of very difficult times. And so it might be that you have a practice of noticing beauty. It's dark here, it's night here now, so you can't see, but there's a beautiful tree outside. It's bright red right now, and we're in our northern autumn, and it won't be there in another day or two. The leaves won't be there. So, this impermanence actually allows us to really notice beauty, and it can become a practice in itself. Just notice one beautiful thing, and it's very available in grief. That even the beauty of the person you've lost or the experience you've lost or what it is, it's available. So there are many human possibilities in this, but we're not separate from anything, of course. And maybe noticing that's useful too.
And of course, that beauty is basically prana. It's really bringing the prana into the body in a sense. It's really allowing that life force to sort of just for that one moment, maybe, enjoy. And of course, we have the breath.
Oh, yes. Yeah. Mm-hmm. So important. And, your constant companion, really, your breath, and how it, for some people, for sure, breath practice itself is it is a dying of the breath and the, coming to you. And sometimes it's true that the exhalation can be very useful with regard to moving into the ventral vagal possibilities of your nervous system, etc. So there's, we know the complexity of human experience through yoga, and the scope is very wide. The practices, whether someone is willing to work with, they're interested in sort of the philosophy or how they might see suffering differently, or if it's more of a bottom-up practice with regard to movement and breath. We're really lucky we have this terrific gift of yoga.
So it's 4:32. We were 4 minutes late. So in the last 2 minutes, is there anything that you would like to say to somebody who's out there who's really, really grieving, really struggling with this thing called grief?
Well, there are some times in our human life where I don't even know if words can enter, but might you know that you're not alone? And there are all kinds of compassionate people and all sorts of compassion in nature and life itself that offer themselves to you, whether it's a time that you can see that or not. But if you might consider that what you're feeling isn't wrong, it's intelligent. It's the brilliant intelligence of this life and our seeming contract with it. And might there be a moment, a breath of self-compassion, and even that's hard, I know.
Beautiful. Oh, Anne, thank you so much. It's just lovely, really. The people you work with are, even though the reasons that they're working with you are maybe not of their choosing, they are very lucky to have you.
That's true.
Really,
That's true. That's true. And it's my really great fortune to work with such beautiful souls and to have had wonderful teachers myself. And I thank you for this, for the invitation, and to see your lovely face again and see the light behind you in California.
Right. Yeah, it's still light and warm here. So thank you.
Well, I'm off to bed.
Yeah, right. So appreciate your time. And for those viewing, I will be putting everything onto YouTube, and then I will let you know on Facebook what that link is, so that you'll see it, and I'll have all the information that Anne has so kindly given us for some of the beautiful teachers and workshops that are available. And then next week I'm out in Deva to speak about anger, another good one. A kind of segue a little bit and wrap it up with a little bit of talk on emotional intelligence. So, which is a favorite topic of his, and one that he has really worked very heavily with for many, many years now. So it'll be beautiful. So Anne, thank you again so much. We wish you well. We wish your family well. And stay healthy.
Thank you. And you too. And thank you for all your work in this. It's beautiful what
Absolutely.
you're bringing to the world.
Absolutely.